All right. Thank you so much for joining today. We are going to talk about emotion regulation today and how caregivers specifically can really start to build emotion regulation for their children. And again, I am Rebecca Shaffer. I'm a psychologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of my research supports and to be transparent about conflicts, I do have research support from the Department of Defense as well as the National Institute of Health, and I'm an author of Regulating Together, and I receive compensation for trainings, which I'll share a little bit about later in terms of the program. I like to start with thank yous because sometimes we run out of time. So, just a big thank you to the co authors of Regulating Together who have really driven so much of this emotion regulation research that I've done, Dr. Lauren Schmidt and Jenna Ruberg, all of my trainees, past and present, many postdocs and graduate students over the years who have contributed to this work, and then my lab here at Cincinnati Children's, and a huge thank you to the families who have participated in our emotion regulation work over the past 10 years. Their commitment and their feedback have definitely fueled the program and the research over the years. So we're going to start off today just talking about what is emotion regulation. What does that mean? It is a term that is thrown around pretty frequently, and I think it's important for us to just have a common understanding as we start to talk about it today. So when we think about emotion regulation, I really want you to focus in on the three pieces of it. So the first one is the experience of emotion. So how does it feel when you have an emotion? What is that like internally? And then also the expression. So this is often what we see, what families come in for help with is that expression of emotion. Is it appropriate for the context? And then the intensity. So how strongly are you feeling it? So emotion regulation is really the process of controlling, managing, adjusting the experience, intensity, and expression of emotions. And we want to think about whether that expression or response is appropriate for the situation that we're in. Emotion regulation can be purposeful. It can be something you really think through, or it can be unconscious and just happen naturally. It usually includes the use of coping skills in some way, and those can be adaptive coping skills or they can be more problematic coping skills. And at its core, it's really the ability to stay calm and manage your emotions in the midst of stress or triggers. So, on the flip side of that, what is emotion dysregulation? It's not just the absence of being able to manage your emotions, but it's really this dysregulated state. So, families often describe it as being reactive or easily triggered. A child might be described as going from 0 to 100. Sometimes it's hard to understand what exactly the triggers are. Often involves things like tantrums or meltdowns. Sometimes we see aggression towards self or others. Outbursts, meltdowns, and then difficulty calming once upset. So there's lots of kids that get upset regularly, but sometimes our kids with autism will get stuck there and they have a hard time coming back down. So the research over the last 10 years has really shown that kids with autism have a predisposition or they're more likely to experience emotion dysregulation. In fact, the research is showing that autistic children are about 4 times more likely to have emotion dysregulation than the typical population. And there's really some pieces of autism that probably set the stage for that dysregulation. So difficulty understanding emotions, their own emotions, as well as other people's, challenges with executive functioning, being able to plan and shift and organize, struggling with transitions, having limited coping skills, sensory sensitivities. So that's a big piece. When you're overwhelmed in terms of sensory information, it's not uncommon for that to then transition to a dysregulated state, as well as difficulties with flexibility. So being rigid, having a hard time with changes. Oftentimes changes will be a trigger for dysregulation. Intolerance of change, poor problem solving strategies. And then we also know there's some biological risk. So there's some differences in the brain. There's some differences in terms of your heart rate and your heart rate variability for autistic children. And that may lead to some of this dysregulated state. As I said, dysregulation, we really conceptualize it as this emotional reactivity, reacting to small situations with big expressions of emotion, underlying irritability, dysphoria, which is a lack of positive emotions, which we see in some of our kids who can get really sad, mood swings, and difficulty calming down. And then why is this important? So the biggest thing is that there are a lot of outcomes, poorer outcomes, that can result when a child is dysregulated or when an adult is dysregulated. So in autism specifically, we see higher rates of hospitalizations, psychiatric hospitalizations, higher rates of suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts, high rates of family stress, use of crisis intervention services like having to call the police or go to the emergency room, high rates of both externalizing and internalizing symptoms, things like being depressed or sad, anxiety, as well as aggression and self-injury. And then we already have social skill deficits, but they're worsened when kids are dysregulated. They often miss out on key learning opportunities in school, both academically and socially, because they're struggling in terms of this dysregulation. So it's really important to start to think about how to build good emotion regulation so we can avoid some of these more intense outcomes that can happen with emotion dysregulation. So now we're going to focus on the caregiver role in emotion regulation. What part do you play as a caregiver? Or for those of you who work with caregivers frequently, how can you encourage caregivers to really start to build some emotion regulation? And they play an incredibly important role. Your part as a caregiver with your children is one of the most important pieces in your child starting to develop some emotion regulation skills. So there's three pieces at play when we think about the role of caregivers in emotion regulation. The first is your own emotion regulation. How do you manage your emotions in front of your children? How do you handle emotions in the home? And then creating a supportive and caring environment, a place where it's okay to have emotions, it's okay to have big emotions. It's totally normal to have dysregulated states occasionally. It's mostly about how do we manage that and move past it. And then the third piece is starting to teach and reinforce emotion regulation skills to children because they may not come naturally. And we may have to start to instill those skills in a more focused way. We have to be more intentional about building those skills for our kids who are autistic. So caregiver emotion regulation for yourself. It's really important for you to take care of yourself. You know, we all know the common, story of put on your own oxygen mask before you put on your child's when you're on a plane. It's true for emotion regulation too. It's going to be really hard for you to support your child if you are feeling dysregulated and feeling overwhelmed. So it's important to make sure you have the resources that you need and that you're taking care of yourself in order to support your child. Deep breathing and muscle relaxation, which we're going to cover today, work for everyone, children and adults. It can be very helpful. Apps can also be really helpful to create relaxation and mindfulness practices for caregivers. This first one, Sanvello, is a free app that you can download, and it has check-in points throughout the day. You can set up different times where it will check in with you and ask how you're feeling. And if you rate yourself at a certain number, it will give you a relaxation or a mindfulness task that you can do in that moment. You can choose how long they are as well. So you might be very busy and not have time to do a long, drawn out mindfulness practice, but it makes it work within your life, which I think is a really nice option. And important because you're not going to continue to practice it if it's too hard or too time consuming. The second one is Headspace. Headspace is a paid app, so keep that in mind. But there is some very nice research about just the simple 10-session Headspace being used with caregivers of a range of kids with neurodevelopmental disorders, not just autism, but just doing that simple 10-session series can be really helpful and kind of change anxiety and emotion dysregulation symptoms. The last one is Calm. So Calm has had an initiative with a lot of organizations. If you're working or if your spouse is working, they have free services for a lot of jobs. So here at Cincinnati Children's, we have free access to Calm. A lot of other organizations started doing this in the height of COVID. And so I would think about, checking into that and seeing if that's an option for you. There's a lot of great resources for your children on Calm as well as for adults. Positive self-statements to yourself as a caregiver is really important. I'm doing a great job. I'm doing my best. This will pass. So making sure you're giving yourself that positive reinforcement, just like we will for our kids. And then therapy is always, always a good idea. So if you find yourself as a caregiver having consistently a hard time managing emotions and just feeling really overwhelmed, seeking out your own therapy is a great idea. Because the more you work on this, the more you create an environment where managing emotions, feeling big emotions is okay, the better your child is going to do as well. So taking care of yourself is really important. Also, for caregiver emotion regulation, we want to think about your support system. So, you really want to build a network of support. Having a child who is struggling in some way, having an autistic child, can be isolating at times. It can feel like you're the only person experiencing these challenges in your home, and it can be hard to talk about because you don't know if others understand where you're coming from. So it's really important to think about what supports you have in place. Who supports you as a caregiver and who supports your child? This is an exercise that we do in our regulating together groups where we have these circles and families fill in the circles, like where they're getting support in different areas. So if you have some time, you might want to sit down and draw this out. It's called an eco map, making a circle in the middle for yourself. And then what supports do you have? And then also doing one for your child. What supports does your child or your adult, your autistic adult have? So that you can start to think through where are these supports and maybe the areas where you don't have as many supports and how can you start to build those. Because when you feel supported and like you have resources, you are definitely going to feel a better baseline level of regulation because you feel less overwhelmed. So you want to think about when and how to lean into supports as well. Sometimes when we're struggling, it's really hard to talk about it. It's hard to share it with other people. And so you want to think about when are the times that you actually probably really do need to share it and you need to talk about it and get some additional support. And so, giving yourself permission to seek that support is important. Giving yourself an idea of who is safe to talk about this with and get the support that you need. One of the topics that we that has started to gather more research in the last several years is this idea of co-regulation. So you are your child's first regulation model. The way that you handle your stressors and the way that you handle your child's dysregulation becomes a model and a framework for them to also learn how to regulate. It's really important to model experiencing and managing emotions. It's not okay to hide the fact that you have emotions or to not share with your kid. It's actually really important that they know that you experience big emotions too, and that you're able to manage them. Big emotions aren't scary. They're not a bad thing, but we need to model how we manage those in the moment. You really want to use regulation skills to calm yourself in the moment. And that's not just because of the modeling piece. There's actually some very interesting research that our physiological response, our heart rate and our breathing actually co-regulates with people around us, especially people we're very close to. So you as a caregiver and your child together, if they're very upset, and you do your own deep breathing in the moment, not to model for them, but just to do your own deep breathing to control your own physiological response. So to slow your heart rate, slow your breathing down, your child's physiological response is actually going to start to mirror that in some ways. So they are also going to start to calm because your body is calming. So, early in my career, I would hear from, supervisors that if a kid was having a hard time, it was really important that we appeared to stay calm. So your heart might be racing, you might feel really stressed in that moment, but you need to appear calm. And actually, what we're learning is that we need to actually be calm. So just appearing calm isn't really enough. So doing something yourself to start to calm yourself down is going to co-regulate your child. They are going to start to regulate in the moment. And this is something that naturally happens in infancy. And throughout development, we co-regulate with the people around us. But being really intentional about that and not just thinking about it as I'm going to model for you, but I'm actually just going to focus on calming myself. And if I can calm down, I'm going to help you calm down too. So if we think about the role of caregivers in emotion regulation, it shifts over development. So kids need different things. Adults need different things at different stages in life. So early in development, children really learn to regulate from caregivers. That co-regulation piece that I just talked about is a really important first step. Caregivers manage the environment and they provide support. They're really kind of in control of how and when emotions happen and then how they support their children in those moments. But as kids grow, they start to regulate emotions on their own. This is not linear. So it doesn't mean that one day your kid starts to regulate on their own and the next day they should be able to do it going forward. Oftentimes it's a trial and error process. Some days they have the capacity to regulate and some days it's just a really hard day and they don't have the capacity to do it. So keeping in mind that this is going to ebb and flow over time. And for most of our autistic children, emotion regulation development is actually a bit slower. And they co-regulate for a longer time. We don't have all of the research to show that, but we see it a lot clinically that kids just need a little bit more time, a little bit longer to co-regulate with their caregivers than what we might see in typical development. And some developmental periods require more support than others. So if we think about the preschool age range, if you have preschoolers right now, preschool is actually a very big period in terms of brain development and their body's learning to manage emotions and manage the feeling of emotions. So a lot of times the preschool age range needs a lot of support. They need a lot of co-regulation and a lot of guidance from their caregivers. And then adolescence and puberty is a time where emotion dysregulation can get worse. It's really hard to learn how to manage your emotions when you have a lot of hormones happening and a lot more big feelings, a lot of mood swings. And that's true in typical development, not just for autistic teenagers. And so we really want to think about how do we provide support. A lot of times adolescent parents feel a little tired and overwhelmed. Like, I've been providing the support for a long time. It's time for him to start doing it himself. Which unfortunately that coincides with a time where they actually need more support. They need you to help them regulate more. They need more support in thinking through how to manage their emotions. And so just keeping in mind, even though they're older, it doesn't mean that they're ready to be independent with emotion regulation specifically. And it may be a time where you provide more support than you had to during those school age time periods. So we often get asked, when will they do this on their own? Like, why do I have to keep supporting it? It depends on a lot of factors. And it likely changes often. There's probably going to be days where they're fully independent, they can manage stressors, and other days where it's a little bit harder. Children often apply skills to other people first. And you're going to hear me say that a few times throughout this talk. Kids might learn something like how to rate their emotions. And instead of rating their own emotions throughout the day, caregivers will tell us, oh, he's rating my emotions. He's telling me when I'm a 5, or he's telling me I need to get back to a 3. And that can be a little annoying for caregivers sometimes, but it's actually a sign that they're learning. And that's a really positive thing. So oftentimes we will see as kids learn, they apply it to the people around them, their siblings, their parents, their friends, before they're able to apply it to themselves. And you have to be ready. You have to be ready to scaffold or provide support and adjust your level of support as needed. Some days you're going to provide a lot of support and some days you're not. And you just kind of have to be able to be flexible and roll with that, which can be hard in the moment at times. But, keeping in mind they will eventually regulate their own emotions. That is a skill that they're going to have. But your job as caregiver is really to support and then back off on support when they're ready to do it on their own. So let's talk about some specific emotion regulation skills. When we talk about skills, there's a range of them. I'm only going to cover some of them today, but there's lots of good resources for emotion regulation skills and ways to teach them to think through that I'll share as well. So first of all, just to kind of set the stage, when we're teaching emotion regulation skills, we really want a lot of visuals. We want to be able to see the skills, make it as concrete as possible for your child or your adolescent, and then put those visuals around your home or school. Many times there will be different skills that are being taught at home versus at school. So as much as possible, becoming consistent, having a common language across home and school, so that they're hearing the same thing consistently. They have visuals that are the same across home and school to support those emotion regulation skills. Emotion regulation skills are best taught when the child is calm. So many times I'll hear from families, oh, we covered this in therapy. We went home, he had a tantrum, and I told him to do his deep breathing, and he didn't do it. Well, I'm not surprised he didn't do it. He doesn't have the skill yet. So we really have to master the skill when we're calm, create some muscle memory, and then be able to use it in times where we're more upset or stressed. Emotion regulation skills take a lot of practice, and that practice really needs to happen when they're calm. You really need to make it part of the culture of your home and a practice for everyone in the home. And that really reduces pressure. So if everybody is practicing it together, your child is or teen is much more likely to also do it because there's no stigma around it. There's no feeling of otherness or that there's something wrong with me. I have to do this. Instead, this is just what we do. This is part of the, support that happens in our home. We all practice emotion regulation, and it's good. It's good for all of your kids or your whole family. It's good to practice these skills together. As I said earlier, they may first apply the skills to other people, or they might expect you to do it first so they can watch, and then they'll try it themselves. This means that they're learning, they're processing the skills, they're thinking about it. That's a great sign. Don't become frustrated that they're telling you to calm down or they're telling their siblings to calm down. That means they're learning and processing. And then we really want to think about how we're going to reward use of emotion regulation skills. I'll talk about this specifically later, but just keep in mind that we want to reward the practice of the skills. We want to reward attempts at using skills, even if we're not successful, just the fact that we tried it. And then also, if I prompt you to use a skill and you do it, we want to reward that. And we really want to reward independent use of skills. So, for example, if we're, giving tokens or stickers or something like that for practicing, we might give twice as much if you independently use it yourself, because that is a huge deal. It is a big deal that you can do it yourself, and we want to reward that. And then many of these skills are from the Regulating Together intervention program. I'm going to provide you with that website, but I just want to be transparent that it comes from our intervention. And if you're interested in learning more about it, the website has a lot of information. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is breathing skills. I'm sure, a therapist or someone in your life has told you to take deep breaths at some point. Your kid has probably learned to take deep breaths at some point. It has become like pretty common language for us to say that to people. So I just wanted to take a step back and show you some information that helps make it a bit more concrete that deep breathing does actually work. It does something. So deep breathing helps provide oxygen to our brain. It also creates a pause in the moment. kind of to take a step back and focus on breathing for a minute. And it's a really important skill that's going to continue to be helpful far into the future. So we do a lot of research with heart rate and heart rate variability here at Cincinnati Children's. We put little heart rate monitors on the kids that we work with and guide them through some breathing tasks. And this is an example of a child who did some deep breathing. Baseline was when he was just watching a video, a very boring video, and that's just his typical heart rate, what you see on there. And then we told him to relax however he wanted. And we see a little bit of calming of that heart rate. And then we directed him to do deep breathing. So, and we didn't guide him through it. We just said, do your own deep breathing. And you can see that the heart rate really starts to calm down. We see these nice ebbs and flows, hills and valleys across the heart rate. And that is showing us that their body has calmed and that they're in a much more like kind of stable place physiologically. So this is what happens when we successfully do deep breathing. So keep that in mind. So we teach 2 deep breathing skills. There are a bazillion deep breathing skills available on the internet. I encourage you to take a look and see what might work for you as a family. Right here, we have figure 8 breathing, and then we also have triangle breathing. You would often start with figure 8 first, get really good at that, and then maybe try the triangle because it does have a pause in it. There is on the Regulating Together website, it's just regulatingtogether.com. There are some animated videos, and there's one here, and I'm going to just pull it up and briefly show it to you. I'm not going to show the entire video, but this is what the website looks like, and this is our triangle breathing video.
In this video, you'll learn a simple way to calm yourself when you're feeling sad, anxious, or angry. It's called triangle breathing. To do triangle breathing, first imagine a big triangle. It could be in the air in front of you, or you can trace it on your hand or leg. Start by breathing out all the air in your lungs. Next, inhale slowly through your nose as you trace one side of the triangle. Hold your breath while you trace the second side. Finally, breathe out slowly as you trace the third side of the triangle. Repeat the triangle breathing a few more times and you'll start to feel calm. Now let's see how you might use this at school. Imagine you're playing with your friends, but something happens that makes you mad. You start to feel frustrated, but you remember what you learned, triangle breathing. As you trace the triangle, you start to feel your body relax. After a few breaths, check to see how you are feeling. Take more time for triangle breathing if you need.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, but Charlie does a little bit more deep breathing. He calms his body down and he returns back to play with his friends and remembers to use triangle breathing in the future when he needs to calm down. So that video is freely available on the website. You're welcome to access it and use it if it's helpful to you. We're going to practice figure 8 breathing together really fast if you will do it with me. You can put your finger on the sun and we're going to breathe in and breathe out. So when you're teaching this skill to your kids, you want to make sure you encourage them to do it slowly, just like we did together. You want to make sure they do it several times. So you need to do it 3 to 4 times in order to feel the full effect, and do it slowly 3 to 4 times. We really like to do deep breathing that has tracing activities with it because it makes it a bit more concrete and engaging for kids. But if you have older children that don't need that tracing piece, they can easily, just imagine it in their minds as they do deep breathing. Deep breathing is a really important skill because you can do it anytime, anywhere. A lot of kids have calming activities like going and taking a shower, playing a video game, laying in their bed, and they really can't do that when they're out in public, but you can take a deep breath wherever you're at. So the other thing is with the drawing, you need the picture in front of you at the beginning, but you could see Charlie in the video, he traced the triangle on his hand. And that's the end goal, is that we can do it kind of independently, anywhere, using our bodies or our imagination to do it. So again, you would want to practice this a lot before you tried to use it in the moment. We really need some muscle memory in order to do it. We can definitely adapt deep breathing skills. So not everybody's going to be able to pick up figure eight breathing and do it right away. And so for kids that might be a struggle, we are going to think about how to make it even more concrete. So this ball that you can see on the screen opens and closes, it expands. And so that's a really good visual for deep breathing, opening it up and taking a breath and breathing out as we bring it back in. If you have a kid who is struggling with just like the simple act of breathing in, I like to use smelly things. So these are scratch and sniff stickers. You can scratch them, smell it in. You can do it with a candle or any other smell, something with a strong smell. And then practicing blowing out. If that one is hard, you can do that with things like bubbles or a pinwheel so that they can see the actual effect of breathing out. Once you get really good at the sniffing and the smelling, we would combine those into a single deep breath. The second skill that we like to teach is muscle relaxation. So when our muscles relax, our thoughts and breathing often follow. Our body is very interconnected. And so if we're calming one part of it, it's all going to naturally start to calm down as well. So these are pretend skills that we teach kids. You might have to start with real objects first. So instead of squeezing orange juice, you might have to actually squeeze a stress ball. And that's what they start with. I'm going to show you what each of these look like. So chewing some gum is relaxing your jaw, and you just pretend like you have a piece of gum. Jaws and faces often get very tense when we're anxious. And hiding in your turtle shell is just bringing your shoulders up and relaxing, and then bringing your shoulders back up again and relaxing. Squeezing some orange juice is squeezing your hands tight, 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 and releasing. And then squeezing tight, 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 and releasing. And then stretch like a rubber band is just stretching your arms and your legs. The advanced version of this is called progressive muscle relaxation. It's a practice where you start at the top of your head and work all the way through your entire body. There's many videos available of progressive muscle relaxation on YouTube. I would encourage you to just type in kid muscle relaxation, and there's probably many that will come up. Another skill that we teach is mindfulness. We try to make mindfulness as concrete as possible, though, because it's really hard for kids to just sit and think, which is a big part of mindfulness. So one version that we do is rainbow grounding. This is where you look around and you identify all the things you can see of different colors of the rainbow. So you'd start with red and then orange, and you try to find each color. Another one is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 skill. You say 5 things that you see, 4 things that you feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And then we also do a mindful looking activity, which is, looking at something in front of us and just labeling all the things we can see. It's very similar to I Spy, but no guessing involved. We're just going to label what we see. You can do this with an outside picture. We also really like to do it with, just pictures that you can have in front of you. You could have it on your phone and you can easily pull it out and label all of the things that you see. Other types of mindfulness skills is mindful eating. This is really focusing in on all of the parts of eating. So with this Hershey kiss, we would focus on what we see with the Hershey kiss, what we smell. We would move it by our ear and say what we hear. And then we would put it in our mouths and slowly focus on the taste of it and it melting. Mindful movement is another great option. A simple way to do this is 1 minute of fast movement, like jumping jacks, running in place, 1 minute of stretching, and 1 minute of sitting and breathing, and helping your child to think through how it feels differently at each of those stages and which one is most relaxing to them. For some kids, the fast movement is going to be more relaxing. We also want to think about self-soothing strategies. What are the things that just like make you feel good and calm? So if I've had a rough day at work, I like to cuddle up on my couch with a soft blanket and a cup of coffee that I can smell and feel warm with and read a book that I love. So thinking about building those self-soothing strategies for your child is really important. What are the ways that they can take care of themselves when they've had a rough day so that they can recover from those emotions? The smell one, I had a kid that I used to work with that really loved the smell of laundry detergent. The grocery store was kind of overwhelming for him, and he would just go to the laundry detergent aisle when he started to feel overwhelmed at the grocery store. And that was a great calming strategy for him, and ended up putting just a little bit of that smell on a card that he kept in his pocket throughout the day. Creating a coping toolbox and a calming spot in your home is also another really great option. Having something like this at school can be a good option too. Just some of those like fidgets or sensory calming activities that might be a good option for your kid, having some visuals available for them in the calming box so that they remember how to use them. Make sure that you're addressing sensory needs. So kids have sensory needs and they also have a lot of overstimulation, and both of these can really lead to emotion dysregulation. So we want to create opportunities to address sensory needs throughout the day. Make sure that they have sensory breaks at school. They have opportunities to really get some of that sensory input, and include a lot of movement throughout the day if you can. The more we're moving, the less anxious and overwhelmed that we feel. It just naturally calms our body down. We also want to identify sensory activities that are calming and ones that are stimulating, and make sure you're intentional about when you use those. If you need to calm, you don't want to use a sensory activity that actually kind of hypes you up. So really starting to figure that out with your child, which ones are calming and which ones are more engaging. Teaching emotion identification can be really important. We want to start simple and build on it with understanding. Label emotions throughout the day, both in you and your child. That creates like a model and a learning opportunity to practice. This teaches the words in the moment as well. You want to always provide visuals and tools to communicate in the moment. And over time, we want to build awareness of emotional intensity. This helps us to recognize signs early and prevent escalation. Both you prevent it as a caregiver, but also your child prevent it. And we really want the goal for emotion language to become a part of the culture of your home, a language that everyone is using. And if you're able to use it at school and other activities, that's ideal as well. So this is an example of, these are examples of emotion identification tools that can be really helpful. They go from more complex to more simple. Also, zones of regulation is a great option in regard to this, being able to add some concrete information. Adapting these types of tools to individuals with less language or less cognitive ability, we might decrease it to just what we feel with 3 different pictures and how what we need when we have that feeling, so they can identify both of those. You want to practice this just like you practice deep breathing. We do a lot of sorting activities where we provide scenarios and you would raise your finger or say what number you are for each of these situations. We also want to build body awareness of emotions. This is something that autistic individuals often don't have the best understanding of. So it's important that you help support them in that. You want to point out body signs when they're calm, because they might not even know what their body feels like when they're calm. This is an example of like all the body parts and how we could go through it for how we feel when we're calm and then how we feel when we're upset. You want to start to help them also see what happens to their bodies when they're getting upset. You seem like you might be feeling upset right now. You're pacing a lot and your hands are clenched. That tells me that you might feel a little overwhelmed. You also want to point it out about yourself. My breathing is getting really fast. I must be feeling anxious. I should do some deep breathing. Size of the problem is an excellent emotion regulation skill. You want to think about how big a problem is for most people. You can think about the bus driver or a waiter at a restaurant and how they would think how big the problem was. Our reaction should fit the size of the problem. And you can adapt small, medium, and large to something like small deal and big deal. There's also an animated film for this on the Regulating Together website. A little girl has a pretty rough day with lots of problems and talks through the size for each of them. We want to build a positive inner voice for kids, model positive statements for them throughout the day, praise them in front of other people. But if you have corrections to give, you want to actually do that away from other people. Don't criticize them in front of other people. That really builds that negative internal voice. We want to recognize positives throughout the day. Practice asking your kid for what's something good that happened today. When you hear negative statements, you want to remind them to say, what's something positive that we could say, or how could we make that, flip that to something a little bit better. You can also use language like helpful and unhelpful thoughts instead of positive and negative, or inner coach and inner critic. And then this last skill is tip. So these steps are great to do. This is better for our adolescents, but if we change these pieces, do each of these steps together, it actually activates our internal rest and slow system, our parasympathetic system. And it works to shift us away from a fight or flight response. So when emotions are really high, changing your temperature, getting a cold drink of water, blowing a fan on your face, doing intense exercise for 5 or 10 minutes, and then doing some very calm paced breathing and progressive muscle relaxation. So my kid knows the skills. How do I actually get them to use it? So we want to be proactive. We want to know that they're at risk of being dysregulated. So what can we do throughout the day to set them up for success? Don't wait for them to escalate before you prompt using skills, and adjust the level of support as needed. So, heightened emotions can't last forever. If you look at this slide, it always has to come down. So keep that in mind. When you're in the moment, your child is really dysregulated. They're not going to stay there forever. Sometimes we just have to write it out, but we often lose rational control at a level 4 and 5. So that is not the time to be prompting use of these skills I shared today. We really want to prompt the skills when they're at a 3 or a 2 on both sides of this. So before they get dysregulated and after they get dysregulated. Reward systems are great. Just like you use reward systems for changing other behaviors, we want to use it for teaching regulation skills. Reward the practice of skills, reward the fact that they did it independently, reward the frequency, and using things like tokens, visual reminders. Make sure whatever you come up with is feasible for you to actually follow through on and feasible for your kid to actually do. And the reward should really be reserved for what you're working on. Don't take points away or tokens away. That is just a trigger in and of itself. It often doesn't go well. And when there's big life events or schedule changes, you might need to bring rewards back, even though your kid has been successful for a while. This is an example of rewards using the skills that I shared today. Practice deep breathing, practice muscle relaxation, and rate how I feel. Create a reward menu so they can pick out what they want. And a more simplified version is just a picture of each of the strategies and a check mark for practicing it that day. Interventions for emotion dysregulation are growing in autism with strong research support. Regulating Together, that I've talked about a little bit, is a program here at Cincinnati Children's that has really nice efficacy. That means it works when compared with other interventions. Another one is the Emotional Awareness and Skills Enhancement Program. This one comes out of the University of Pittsburgh. It's called EASE. It's an excellent intervention for teens. Secret Agent Society Operation Regulation comes from Australia. It's also an excellent intervention. It's done more one-on-one with kids. Exploring your feelings and exploring feelings for young children is with preschoolers. And those manuals are actually available on Amazon if you'd like to check them out. So, in summary, caregivers play a very important role in emotion regulation development. The level of support needed ebbs and flows throughout development, and skills need to be taught during times of calm before you use them when you're upset. You really want to reinforce skill use and make emotion regulation language part of the culture of your home. Everyone needs to work on regulation. It's not just because you're autistic, it's a good skill for everyone to be doing together. Take care of yourself as a caregiver. That's the very most important first step, is that you are able to regulate yourself, you feel supported, and you feel like you have what you need in order to do the job at hand. And then interventions are available. They're actually very effective, and definitely worth it to check out whether they're available in your area. The Regulating Together website has a list of certified providers that you can look at and see if it's available. And that's it. I can answer questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shaffer. This was really great to have these like tangible takeaways for attendees and anyone who might, watch this later. But we do have about 10 minutes for questions. And so I want to start with a few kind of related questions that have come in from a few folks, specifically about teens. So I think the first question to sort of start this would be, is there a time where it might be, quote unquote, too late to start these interventions? Like if you're, say your child was either diagnosed late or maybe you just are just learning about these interventions now, like would it be too late for somebody with a teen to start introducing this? And if would there be modifications?
It's a great question. So first of all, it's never too late. So we as adults are learning every day to regulate our emotions better. I don't know if, and if you have children, when you first had your babies, you really had to learn how to regulate in a different way. And so it's very similar to that there's always room and growth, room for growth in emotion regulation. We get a lot of kids that come through our Regulating Together program who did get diagnosed late. Like that's not uncommon, especially for some of our, higher cognitive individuals to get diagnosed later in life. And so it can feel as caregivers like you're playing catch up. Like I missed out on having all of this intervention early on, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be helpful now. And so it's definitely a good idea to seek out some support if your child is dysregulated and needs some support. It can definitely still work. And adolescence is the time where they're just starting to be more independent in some of these skills, but oftentimes autistic teenagers need support just a little bit longer. They need some more co-regulation support. So seeking out some therapy services that are going to help the caregiver know how to respond and help the teenager know how to use the skills is going to be really helpful. And then starting to do it more independently in therapy can also be really helpful a little bit later.
Great. And then I think a follow-up that came from a good follow-up question for this that came from a few people is, how can parents or caregivers motivate teens to practice these skills when they're really just outright opposed to it?
Yeah. So this is there's a couple of things I would suggest. One is having a reward plan or reinforcement plan that is developmentally appropriate. So having rewards that the teen is actually interested in. Oftentimes this is like money or getting like points towards buying a video game or something along those lines. So you really need a strong motivation for them. If they're able to recognize that they're struggling in some way, appealing to that. So, when you're out with friends and you get really overwhelmed, that stinks, right? So what can we do if we practice these skills together? You may not get so overwhelmed. So really leaning into the fact that they're developing some more insight. Having a strong reward plan is really important. Rewarding use of skills, not just in the moment, but practice of skills is really important. And then I think this is if you're thinking about an intervention option, a group intervention is actually really nice for teenagers because it creates a positive peer pressure environment. If everyone in the group is practicing it, I'm going to be more likely to feel comfortable practicing it versus one-on-one with a therapist or just with my mom or dad. So group therapy can be a good option for those more resistant teenagers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do what your peers are doing. And then last kind sort of related to this, and then we can move on to something else. But obviously, this talk was focused on children and adolescents. But are there resources that you are aware of out there for caregivers of adults? And
Mhm.
or is that something that's on your website as well, or is there anywhere that people could look for those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ease intervention that I talked about that comes out of Pittsburgh, they've actually expanded ease from just adolescents to young adults as well. So ease is a great option to look into. It is more of a one-on-one intervention, but they do share information with the caregivers. Um, I think there's like a couple of different questions with adults. One is like adults that can do their own therapy and they're more independent, and then adults that are maybe a little bit more dependent still and need some more support. So oftentimes individual therapy is a great option for those. Anyone who's working on anxiety or more depressive symptoms, that has experience with emotion dysregulation and individuals with intellectual disability really should be able to work on these skills and be able to use some of the things that I talked about, but maybe just make them a bit older, a bit more age appropriate.
Right. I think just like you said with the teen examples, just adjusting those rewards to something that's more age
Mm-hmm.
appropriate. So just making those small adjustments, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess speaking of adjustments, for if a caregiver has a child, we talked a little bit about the importance of the movement piece and how sometimes like those fast movements can calm children more than
Mm-hmm.
slower movements, for instance. But if you're dealing with a child perhaps who has motor challenges, are there any specific movements that caregivers could try, or is there something that they can do instead that would sort of get the same results for their children?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's really just movement. So like whatever movement works for them, that is, and the idea behind it is if we're doing fast movement, we're going to get our heart rate up and then we're going to bring it back down naturally. So if you do like a fast movement like jumping jacks, running in place, or just moving your arms really fast or anything that's going to get your heart rate up, then doing some calmer stretching brings it back down, and that's the goal, to increase it and then to decrease it. So any movement that is available to the individual that they're able to successfully do is great. There's no right or wrong in terms of how to do it. The muscle relaxation skills that I talked about, the goal of those is really to tense and release. So thinking about, if they do have some motor challenges, are there specific body parts that are easier for them to tense and release? And I would just start with those instead of doing the entire body.
And that's actually a great segue to another question. We just had some people asking for some more examples of those muscle relaxation techniques. So I guess some pointed examples maybe would be helpful.
So uh we do hide in your turtle shell, which is like the tense and release of your shoulders. We also do a tense and release of our stomach muscles. We call it make your stomach into a wall. So hold your stomach like a wall. You can do the tense and release with your toes, like you're wiggling your toes in the sand. And also watching a tennis match is another one that we do that relaxes your neck. So turning your neck back and forth. If you bookmark the Regulating Together webpage, there will be an animated video of muscle relaxation that should be released in about the next month. And it will have all of the muscle relaxation skills that we teach as part of the program included in it in an animated format showing how to do it.
Great. And it sounds like, the giving a real example to, watching a tennis match or putting a turtle shell, it seems like caregivers could probably have some fun and creativity of coming up with their own
Mm-hmm.
similar motions, following a ball, going up and down or something is kind of similar to
Mm-hmm.
a tennis match. So that's great that people can sort of adapt this to their own child, to their own interests even.
Yep.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I know we're nearing the end of our time. But I think we have time for one more question that just came in. And if there's any, how could caregivers, if you're dealing with a child or adolescent who has aggressive behaviors, and is there ways to de-escalate if, potentially you're working on one of these breathing or movement exercises, but it's escalating the behavior you're trying to regulate, or anything you can share about perhaps tactics there?
Yeah, that is a whole nother talk, I think, in terms of de-escalation. There's lots of strategies that are really helpful. We really think about when a child is so dysregulated to that level 5 stage, right? So they've gone up all the way up to the top of the hill. Our goal is really safety in that moment. So thinking about how you can keep your kids safe, keep you safe, keep the environment safe, and just giving them the space to calm down. Oftentimes that means being silent. So not talking or giving very limited direction, because the more we engage verbally, the more likely we're going to escalate them more and keep them there for longer. And then proximity, so how close or how far away you are, making sure that you're, thinking about safety around the environment, removing things that aren't an option in that moment. So, like if iPad's not an option because it might get thrown, just making sure it's put away so that we're not escalating more. And then really keeping in mind that we can't stay at that heightened state forever. And so the goal is just going to be to keep you safe. And then as we come back down on the other side, we can use those skills again to really support just a quicker calming, and reinforcing these skills are helpful and they help us to stay calm when we're feeling upset. Um, just really thinking about safety and decreasing the amount of language that you're using when they're already super escalated.